Hits record, looks up at camera, does smile. Hi fellow scribblers, and welcome back to the series on becoming a published writer, with particular emphasis on becoming a novelist. Today we're covering something that I don't think you see terribly often in YouTube tutorials, and that is, how do you handle the sticky stuff? The things that are morally queasy, or graphically violent, or sexual explicit in nature, things that might make your readers, yourself, feel uncomfortable. Are there rules for how you go about that? No. Thank you for watching. Join us again next week. Now, there are no hard and fast rules on this one. You are free to write whatever you want. But as with all things creative, it's not about the rules per se, it's about the effect that you're trying to achieve. Now, of course, you could veer away entirely from anything uncomfortable, and the effect that you would achieve would be a very young readership novel, a very sort of safe read. Now, if that's your goal, you may have a large market for that, but it will have the effect of leading you in that direction. You become an incredibly safe read, and that may be a good thing if it's your choice to do so. Veer too far the other way, and you could become polarizing. You might have very strange people who adore what you do, but a large group of people who go, "Ooh, no, it's too frightening, it's too sexual, it's too violent, it's too just plain uncomfortable for me." So it is very much a value judgment choice on your part. Now, I would say that I have a few sort of an amalgamation of principles that I use, and I'll share with you the approaches that I use and see if this makes sense or whether this works for you. I've been thinking about this sort of thing for years now. Now, firstly, I don't try to veer away from the conflict-based stuff, because that is the heart and soul of all drama. From Peter Rabbit cartoons that your kid watches in the morning, all the way up to the very dark stuff on, say, a Netflix or in novels, all of it is about conflict. It's about things going wrong. It's about that feeling of, what will happen next? So inherently, I think there's something wrong with veering away from conflict writ large. You need the conflict. It is the heart and soul of storytelling. But there are things that mitigate for you if it makes you morally queasy. For example, remember that your characters don't necessarily have to endorse the bad. You can take a bad thing, a thing that makes you uncomfortable, and you can have your characters rebel against it. Or you can have a character negotiate this thing and feel very uncomfortable about it. And that becomes this wonderful balancing act where you're showing something that creates tension and discomfort, but you're also guiding us through it from the focal point of a character who is upset about the thing. You can go further than that as well. You can have the character go through an arch where they start off okay with the thing and it becomes unacceptable to them later on. You as the writer, of course, get to play God here. So you might create something that you know is not okay, something that is that makes you morally queasy, that is upsetting. But you might know that in the long run, your character is going to undo that, or resolve that, or rebel against that, or rise above that. So your reader has to live this in real time. They may go through the discomfort of it, but it becomes part of the emotional payoff at the end that the character resolves this in some shape or form. Your readers must enjoyably suffer through the immediacy of it. But there is something to be said for authors who are brave enough to let a plot go as far and as strange as it possibly can. I'll give you a great example of this one. It's such interesting storytelling. I watched, I think it's a 5-part series on Netflix a while ago called Inside Man. It's a little bit Silence of the Lambs, but slightly less dark. They have this fabulous actor inside a prison, and people are consulting him, getting advice on how to get out of legal predicaments and so forth. He's on death row. Now, the story on the other side of the world is a reverend in an English church. And he has this bizarre set of circumstances through which a fundamentally good man ends up locking a woman in a basement. And there he is. He's a reverend. And he has slightly kind of accidentally locked this woman in his basement, and he can't let her out. Now, I'm not going to explain the entire storyline, but it pushes credulity to its straining point. But the skill of the writing was such that it is believable at every point. Now, what they've done there, think of it in terms of a flagpole and a flag. The flagpole is the disciplined structure that holds it together, and that's the excellence of the writing. The flag itself can then flap out and go as wild as humanly possible, provided the structure is there. So with clever writing in place, you can let your plot expand into the realms of weirdness. And I personally admire authors who let it go as far as it possibly can. There's something wonderful about reading that sort of thing. So, here are some of the principles that I keep in mind when I write. First one comes from Stephen King. He advises us, write with the door closed and then throw it open. So what he's saying there is, don't write with the fear that your aunt is going to read every word. Don't write with the neurosis that your close friends are going to be judging you. Something actually quite interesting happens when you read a novel. Even with dark psycho killers or sex scenes, you don't think of that as the author. You get lost in the story of it, and afterwards you actually emerge and admire the writer of this thing. It tends to go the other way when it glamorizes it. It's not part of the story. It looks as though the author is having an orgiastic feast with the violence. And in fact, that's actually principle part 2 that also comes from Stephen King. He says there was something that makes him feel morally queasy about movies like Saw, where you are invited to root for evil. And I think for me, that's an incredibly good guideline. I've mentioned a couple of times, I read quite a lot of Dean Koontz books, and I mean, his bad guys are phenomenal. They are either deeply psychotic, incredibly violent, outright demonic, monstrous in one form or another. But we are not invited to root for the bad guy. And I think that's a very interesting key distinction. You can go as dark as you like, as long as fundamentally good wins. Now that one comes from Dean Koontz, and that's perhaps a bit of a departure from Stephen King. I like that outlook. Go as dark as you want to, but have goodness triumph at the end of the day. If it is not your goal to have goodness triumph, it almost begs a different question. We get outside of the realms of writing and we go, well, then what are you doing with your life? Is it your point to promote evil, to make people feel hopeless and terrible? Then there are all different questions to be answered there. For me personally, I will go as dark and as twisted as I possibly can with my villains and my scenarios, but I want goodness to prevail. And I think the darker you go, the greater the win for good. And that there we get to a little bit of Tolkien. It's, can things ever be put right? And, it's Samwise Gamgee saying, there is goodness in this world, and it's worth fighting for. But think about how dark that goes. Now, okay, in his case, he doesn't necessarily go morally queasy, but it goes very dark. So I like that as a set of principles. Write with the door closed. Go as dark and as freaky as you want to. But resolve it for the good in some shape, sense, or form, ultimately. That's how I do it. I don't like stories that invite me to enjoy the evil of it, to enjoy the destruction of human beings. There's something very different between watching a psycho killer, say, take out a family, and then watching someone take out the psycho killer, versus watching someone just torture people over and over and over. And you can tell that you're being invited to indulge in a certain sickness. There's something desperately wrong with that, and I don't want to do it. I'll go as dark as the story calls for, but I want goodness to prevail ultimately. Final tip on that one comes from the world of hobbits. There's a very famous story about the genius C.S. Lewis talking to Tolkien, two of the greatest minds of the past century. And apparently what had happened was that Tolkien had written The Hobbit, and it had done incredibly well, and his publisher wanted more. And he was chatting with C.S. Lewis about this, and C.S. Lewis just dropped this nugget of genius. He says, the problem with your hobbits is that they're only interesting when they are in non-hobbity scenarios. Now, folks, I think we can derive great depth and revelation from that one. The more bizarre the scenario to your character, the more drama you create. So you can even think about your squeamish bits this way. What's the worst thing for my character? What's the thing they do not want to go through? What would be the thing that would make them the most uncomfortable? To then negotiate that scenario through the viewpoint of that character generates phenomenal drama. Lord of the Rings, I mean, one of possibly the greatest story ever written. And what he did was he took hobbits and put them into the worst possible non-hobbity scenarios. Go save the world as knights against great evil. And how incredible was that? I had, in my upcoming book, CharacterScan, I have a young woman named Katrina, and she's able to sense the intentions of others. And I put her through a scenario where her best friend, a girl, is quite sexually wild, and she arranges, after a Linkin Park concert, she tries to arrange a foursome with two guys that they have just met. Now, talk about the potential for morally squeamish. And just to add to that, Penguin published this, so you can write that sort of thing. What I do there is I negotiated that scenario by going as close to the to the queasy stuff as you can possibly get, while doing it through the mounting discomfort of my main character, who starts off quite interested in this idea. One of the boys comes home from the Linkin Park concert with a latex pig's head, and he puts it on in the middle of things. And Katrina can sense their intentions and can sense the selfishness, the ugliness within these boys, and she increasingly draws back and doesn't want to. Her friend can't, and she does want to. She's a wild child. And I know where I'm going to take my character ultimately, but I draw this scene out and I create tension between her and the boys, and tension between her and the best friend, and sexual tension and drama. Is this or is this not going to happen? And the way in which I negotiate that is by knowing where the character's going to end up and allowing this thing to play out. So for me, that's how you heighten this will it, won't it, is this acceptable, isn't it? And it's all the tension that creates drama without necessarily being something that I can't show to the world. And I do want to show it to the world. In fact, speaking of which, I went over to Audible the other day, and I see that the pre-orders for CharacterScan are now live. So folks, if you're interested in seeing what happens to Katrina in that scene and others, the Audible audiobook, read by me, is now available for pre-orders. It comes out in about 3 weeks' time. I believe the ebook becomes available worldwide for pre-orders in a week or two from now, and the paperback comes out at the end of this month. Bit of a tricky one. So far as I know, it's published in South Africa, and I don't know if anywhere else, but the ebook and audiobook everywhere else. So, that's how I negotiate this stuff. I will go as dark as I possibly can and as strange as I possibly can, provided it holds together, provided I am not inviting the audience to root for evil, provided it's going somewhere and has some reason for being there. I write with the door closed and I let it go as strange and as dark as it needs to go. I often find that the characters direct me through this too. There's something wonderful, I'm sure you've experienced, about seeing your characters come alive and start to argue with each other because they want different things. So if you have a morally queasy scene, remember that what the characters think and want can help to mitigate against what's bad in the world around them. You can have them go through the most profound evil, the most explicit sexual scenes, and you can keep a light on in the darkness via their thought processes and their intentions. And you also know where it's going in the long term, so let your readers suffer through it in real time. You know what the end game is. You are the god of this book. So, I hope that helps. I think the most important principle for me is I don't want evil to win. I want good to prevail at the end of this. But good prevailing without it going through hell is relatively meaningless. So let them go through hell first. That's what generates the drama. That's what generates the tension. So don't be afraid to send your little hobbits across Mordor. Don't be afraid to send your main character into a dormitory with a boy with a pig's mask with bad intentions, and guide them through it. You know where they're going to end up. If there are any thoughts or questions you might have on the writing process, do just drop us a comment below. If you have a morally dark scene that worked out for the good, how about telling us about it? Drop us a comment below. For now, remember that the most important part of writing is gluing your bum to that chair and getting the words onto the page. You've had some ideas, hopefully it sparked your imagination. Now get back to writing.